Hi, I'm Alden Windrow, and today I'll be diving into the book Catch-22. As someone with an appreciation for satire, I had heard that Catch-22 would be worth checking out. Stephen King has praised it as one of two great American novels in the past 50 years. Usually, I tend to stay away from war movies and books, but this one seemed like it had something different to say besides the usual glorification of the war hero and the military. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I picked up a copy from the library, and the librarian said that she tried to read it but couldn't really get into it, and I thought, oh boy, what am I in for? However, once I started reading it, I found I was connecting with the humor in it. The version I picked up had an introduction in it by Malcolm Bradbury, in which he notes that the author Joseph Heller referred to it, quote, not just as a war novel, but an encyclopedia of the current mental atmosphere. And that piqued my interest because, as I mentioned, a novel where it's just the glorification of war with no real insight into the psychology of the people fighting in the war is not going to be of much interest to me. And Joseph Heller served in the U.S. Army Corps during World War II, and like the main character Yossarian, served as a bombardier. While satire was not invented in the 50s and 60s, its flavor of black comedy was becoming more of a coping mechanism for society by laughing at the absurd, ridiculing the corrupted powers that be. All of this was an effort to put the chaos and disorder into a clearer perspective, showing how things really are. But if you approach a book like this without a sense of humor, you may not see the truth in it. You may miss out on the laughter if you're not tuned into why such stories are presented in such an absurd way. And as I was reading this book, I got a strong Monty Python kind of vibe. I'm a huge Python fan, and I wouldn't be surprised if it influenced the show because it's square in the theater of the absurd. I kept getting flashes of Graham Chapman as the Colonel in my reading of it. Starting in Chapter 2, Yossarian, who is sitting in the back of the officers' club he is proud in not having helped build, hates Appleby, the fair-haired boy from Iowa who believed in God, motherhood, and the American way of life. And he wants to machine gun the people, quote, busy at the bar singing sentimental old favorites that nobody else ever tired of. It's clear that Yossarian is not all that enthusiastic about his place in the military or the war effort he is a part of. Quote, the officers laughed again when they heard Yossarian mimicking them. That Yossarian, they said more loudly. That Yossarian echoed. Yossarian, please, Nately pleaded. You see what I mean? Asked Clevenger. He has antisocial aggressions. Oh, shut up, Dunbar told Clevenger. Dunbar liked Clevenger because Clevenger annoyed him and made the time go slow. Heller sets up the satirical world of war by expressing things in such a sarcastic way, taking cliches like making the time go by fast and expressing their opposite. Yossarian is pegged as antisocial and aggressive, but he has reasons like not wanting to be in this war in the first place. Things like that tend to make one a little less friendly towards the people one has to serve with for a cause it doesn't take long to realize he has lost his belief in, if he ever did believe in it in the first place. Clevenger, after hearing Yossarian's explanation of how the people who don't care for him are out to kill him, diagnoses Yossarian as crazy. Quote, gasping furiously for air, Clevenger enumerated Yossarian's symptoms, an unreasonable belief that everybody around him was crazy, a homicidal impulse to machine gun strangers, retrospective falsification, an unfounded suspicion that people hated him and were conspiring to kill him. But Yossarian would disagree. He sees himself as the sane one with everyone around him as insane, and he does have a point since every time he flies on a mission, he puts his life in peril while questioning if it's really worth it. In stark contrast to Yossarian is Havermeyer, who seems to live to put his life in danger for the bombing missions. Quote, Havermeyer was a lead bombardier who never missed. Yossarian was a lead bombardier who had been demoted because he no longer gave a damn whether he missed or not. He had decided to live forever or die in the attempt, and his only mission each time he went up was to come down alive. Unlike Havermeyer, Yossarian, we learn, cares more about preserving his own life than winning the war. And unlike Havermeyer, who recklessly flies straight to targets and sticks around to watch the bombs hit their targets, Yossarian drops the bombs as quickly as possible, making it difficult for the other pilots to stay in formation with him. The planes following him, quote, flung out all over the sky like prayers, each one a pushover for the German fighters, which was just fine with Yossarian, for there were no German fighters anymore and he did not want any exploding planes near his when they exploded. In this war effort, we find out that Yossarian is not a team player. He only wants to preserve his own life, not caring if the other planes on his side go down and trying to follow him. While this all may seem rather selfish on Yossarian's part, he does have valid reasons to keep such an attitude because he has no choice but to participate in these missions that have no end in sight. Dr. Nika explains the catch. Quote, Anyone who wants to get out of combat duty isn't really crazy. There was only one catch, and that was Catch-22, which specified that a concern for one's own safety in the face of dangers that were real and immediate was the process of a rational mind. Because of Yossarian's concern for self-preservation, he can never be considered crazy enough to be dismissed from his bombing duties. There is no escape, as illustrated in the design of the B-25s that contain narrow crawlways that Yossarian can barely squeeze through. Quote, the crawlway was Yossarian's lifeline to outside from a plane about to fall, but Yossarian swore at it with seething antagonism, reviled it as an obstacle put there by Providence as part of the plot that would destroy him. There was room for an additional escape hatch right there in the nose of a B-25, but there was no escape hatch. Instead, there was the crawlway. Yossarian yearns to be seated on top of the escape hatch with a parachute already hooked to his harness, ready to avoid the, quote, goddamn foul black tears of flak bursting and booming and billowing all around and above and below him in a climbing, cracking, staggered, banging, phantasmagorical, cosmological wickedness that jarred and tossed and shivered, clattered and pierced, and threatened to annihilate them all in one splinter of a second in one vast flash of fire. It's not hard to empathize with Yossarian's unenviable position. He seems to be a misfit in the war and doesn't share the same enthusiasm as some of the others who do fit in, like Appleby, who, unlike Yossarian, quote, shot skeet and never missed, or unlike the other gamblers who could out-cheat Yossarian even when he tried to win by cheating. Out of the mouths of the unaware and the unwise comes wisdom about money, as Colonel Cargill writes, quote, it takes brains not to make money. Any fool can make money these days, and most of them do. Another example of someone who views the war in a different light from Yossarian is Chief White Halfoat, who sees the war as fortunate, saving him from being kicked off the land where oilmen had taken over. Quote, only the army saved me. Luckily, the war broke out just in the nick of time, and a draft board picked me right up out of the middle and put me down safely in Lowry Field, Colorado. I was the only survivor. But Yossarian's resentment about the war keeps growing due to the broken promises of his involvement in it ending once he completes all the required missions. The number of 50 is simply a lie by Colonel Cathcart, who decides to raise the number to 55, and Doc Danica casually corrects Yossarian as if it were completely natural for the number to keep rising. Quote, Yossarian slumped with disappointment. Then I really have to fly the 50 missions, don't I? He grieved. The 55, Doc Danica corrected him. What 55? The 55 missions the Colonel now wants all of you to fly. Heller takes aim at the upper ranks of the military, ridiculing their hypocrisy and ineptitude, such as Lieutenant Scheisskopf, who is obsessed with conducting parades so that they can win awards and prestige. He's not the least bit concerned with the war and seems divorced from the reality of it. His unit wins the parade by marching without swinging their arms. Quote, Lieutenant Scheiskov's preparations were elaborate and clandestine. All the cadets in his squadron were sworn to secrecy and rehearsed in the dead of night on the auxiliary parade ground. They marched in darkness that was pitch and bumped into each other blindly, but they did not panic, and they were learning to march without swinging their hands. Lieutenant Scheiskov's first thought had been to have a friend of his in the sheet metal shop sink pegs of nickel alloy into each man's thigh bones and link them to the wrists by strands of copper wire with exactly 3 inches of play. But there wasn't time. There was never enough time, and good copper wire was hard to come by in wartime. So Scheiskov is hailed as a military genius and rises to first lieutenant even though he really doesn't do anything worthy of rising in the ranks. It's obvious that no one else gives a damn about the parades. Yossarian himself is promoted to captain simply for acting logically, but the colonels see it differently because he doesn't drop the bombs the first time like the others and has to go back a second time to ensure he hits the target. They don't follow the logic, but have to come up with an explanation for why he went around twice. Quote, But what are we going to do? Colonel Cathcart exclaimed with distress. The others are all waiting outside. Why don't we give him a medal? Colonel Korn proposed. For going around twice? What can we give him a medal for? For going around twice, Colonel Korn answered with a reflective, self-satisfied smile. After all, I suppose it did take a lot of courage to go over that target a second time with no other planes around to divert the anti-aircraft fire. And he did hit the bridge. You know, that might be the answer to act boastfully about something we ought to be ashamed of. That's a trick that never seems to fail. Do you think it will work? I'm sure it will, and let's promote him to captain too, just to make certain. Heller brilliantly satirizes the military's reframing failure or embarrassment as heroism. In this sense, they are master institutional gaslighters, overwriting reality in order to keep up the illusion of competence and grandeur. Heller highlights the absurdity of an overzealous patriotism, an imagined loyalty that has nothing to do with reality, which is illustrated by Captain Black, who gets the idea of making the enlisted men sign loyalty oaths for every little thing they need, including their food in the mess hall. When Milo refuses to deprive Major of food for not signing loyalty oaths, which is not really his fault since they won't let him sign them anyways, he is lectured by Captain Black. Quote, National defense is everybody's job, Captain Black replied to Milo's objection. And this whole program is voluntary, Milo. Don't forget that. The men don't have to sign Pilchard and Wren's loyalty oath if they don't want to, but we need you to starve them to death if they don't. It's just like Catch-22. Don't you get it? You're not against Catch-22, are you? But when Major de Coverley returns from Rome with an eye patch, he puts an end to the Captain Black's ridiculous loyalty oath crusade. Quote, Milo carefully said nothing when Major de Coverley stepped into the mess hall with his fierce and austere dignity the day he returned and found his way blocked by a wall of officers waiting in line to sign loyalty oaths. At the far end of the food counter, a group of men who had arrived earlier were pledging allegiance to the flag with trays of food balanced in one hand in order to be allowed to take seats at the table. Already at the tables, a group that had arrived still earlier was singing the Star-Spangled Banner in order that they might use the salt and pepper and ketchup there. Major de Coverley sweeps away the loyalty oath he is asked to sign, saying, "Gimme eat." He then says, "Give everybody eat." And that's the end of the loyalty oath crusade. Again, these absurd loyalty oaths have nothing to do with actual patriotism, but are simply Captain Black's power trip, imagining himself a bastion of patriotism, enjoying having the other, quote, big shots like Milo Minderbinder, Doc Danica, and Pilchard and Wren when they trembled at his approach and groveled at his feet, All of this is so that Captain Black can feel himself to be a, quote, man of consequence. We encounter all kinds of strange reasons for men being promoted in the ranks that don't make much sense. Major, for example, rises easily through cadet school simply because his instructors want to, quote, push him along quickly and be rid of him. He's enlisted into the military only because the FBI's suspicions of his being a communist for majoring in English history instead of American history. In short, because Major actually does what he's told, everyone is suspicious of him. Quote, actually, Major had been promoted by an IBM machine with a sense of humor almost as keen as his father's. When war broke out, he was still docile and compliant. They told him to enlist, and he enlisted. They told him to apply for aviation cadet training, and he applied for aviation cadet training. Colonel Cathcart, who prays for Major Duluth's death, finds an opening in the door for the appointment of Major as squadron commander. Once this happens, Major's camaraderie with the rest of the enlisted men comes to an end. We find out that, quote, Colonel Cathcart had nursed an implacable grudge against Major for a long time. A superfluous major on his rolls meant an untidy table of organization and gave ammunition to the men at 27th Air Force Headquarters who Colonel Cathcart was positive were his enemies and rivals. And so we see how dysfunctional the military is through the misplacement of so many who are promoted for no good reason into positions they are not qualified to be in. Major is an interesting character because he exemplifies the misplaced person whose life decisions are made for him based on misinformation rather than merit. The satire on rank in this novel exposes a highly flawed system that enables the higher-ranking officials to pull rank based on power trips, their decisions based on what assuages their ego rather than what's best for the enlisted men put in these unenviable positions. He spends his time at his desk signing meaningless documents. Quote, most of the official documents that came to Major's desk did not concern him at all. The vast majority consisted of allusions to prior communications with Major had never seen or heard of. There was never any need to look them up, for the instructions were invariably to disregard. In the space of a single productive minute, therefore, he might endorse 20 separate documents each, advising him to pay absolutely no attention to any of the others. Even when Major tries to do wrong, nothing happens to him, such as when he decides to start signing his name as Washington Irving to the endless stream of official documents that come across his desk instead of signing his own name simply because he likes how it feels. Thereafter, he begins signing all the documents with his fake name as an act of rebellion, expecting to be punished, but nothing happens. This highlights the absurdity of his position. Quote, he had sinned, and it was good, for none of the documents to which he had signed Washington Irving's name ever came back. Here at last was progress, and Major threw himself into his new career with uninhibited gusto. Signing Washington Irving's name to official documents was not much of a career, perhaps, but it was less monotonous than signing Major. And when Washington Irving did grow monotonous, he could reverse the order and sign Irving Washington until that grew monotonous. And he was getting something done, for none of the documents signed with either of these names ever came back to the squadron. Captain Yossarian tracks down Major, who is extremely hard to get a hold of simply because of some absurd rule he creates to deny permission for anyone to speak to him, including his own staff. Yossarian wants the Major to dismiss him after flying 51 missions, explaining that even after flying 4 more, Colonel Cathcart would raise the number of missions again. Quote, what could you do? Major asked himself again. What could you do with a man who looked you squarely in the eye and said he would rather die than be killed in combat? A man who was at least as mature and intelligent as you were, and who you had to pretend was not. What could you say to him? He suggests letting Yossarian fly milk runs, missions that are considered safe and uneventful with no enemy resistance, But Yossarian says this isn't good enough and explains he doesn't want to be in the war anymore. Quote, "Would you like to see our country lose?" Major Major asks. "We won't lose. We've got more men, more money, and more material. There are 10 million men in uniform who could replace me. Some people are getting killed, and a lot more are making money and having fun. Let somebody else get killed." But suppose everybody on our side felt that way. Then I'd certainly be a damned fool to feel any other way, wouldn't I? Yossarian's argument reveals that the war is no longer about winning it, since that's already a given, and because it's a given, there's no reason for him in particular to die fighting in it. Let someone else who thinks the war is at stake die, because in the end it won't affect the outcome of the war. Although Major Major knows he shouldn't say there is nothing he can do, he says, quote, "I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do." Yossarian continues to argue his point with Clevenger, who still hasn't totally bought into Yossarian's point of view. Quote, "Open your eyes, Clevenger. It doesn't make a damn bit of difference who wins the war to someone who's dead." Clevenger claims that Yossarian's attitude would only serve to comfort their enemies. Quote, "The enemy," retorted Yossarian with weighted precision, "is anybody who's going to get you killed no matter which side he's on, and that includes Colonel Cathcart. And don't you forget that, because the longer you remember it, the longer you might live." But Clevenger did forget it, and now he was dead. In sharp contrast to Yossarian's point of view about the war are those like General Driedel, who, quote, "believed that the young men who took orders from him should be willing to give up their lives for the ideals, aspirations, and idiosyncrasies of the old men he took orders from. He doesn't care how the men behave otherwise, overlooking a naked Yossarian ready to receive a medal, naked because a, quote, "man was killed in his plane over Avignon and bled all over him." It's explained later that the man is Snowden, and when Colonel Cathcart says he will punish Yossarian, General Driedel says, quote, "What the hell do I care if he's punished or not? He's just won a medal. If he wants to receive it without any clothes on, what the hell business is it of yours?" Heller highlights the complications of war, where your enemy might even be among your own ranks, the very commanding officers who put you in harm's way for no good reason, ultimately not giving a damn whether you live or die because it's all for the good of the cause, but it's a cause Yossarian doesn't believe in. Only fools like Clevenger, who still believe in it, end up dead, and Yossarian isn't about to end up like Clevenger, whose death is pointless and explained as a, quote, "disappearance" for no good reason. Yossarian takes refuge in the hospital, where people don't disappear into a cloud like Clevenger does, or any of the other gruesome ways of dying described in the book. Quote, "There was none of that tricky, now you see me, now you don't business so much in vogue outside the hospital, none of that now I am and now I ain't. It's in the hospital Yossarian encounters the soldier in white, quote, constructed entirely of gauze, plaster, and a thermometer. The identity of the soldier is a mystery to everyone, even the nurses. But the protective walls of the hospital represent what the outside world enmeshed in war refuses to acknowledge, that a life is not to be carelessly terminated simply for the agendas and accolades of the military bureaucracy. In the hospital, life is still honored regardless of whether it's an ideal one or not. Quote, lying there that way might not have been much of a life, but it was all the life he had, and the decision to terminate it, Yossarian felt, should hardly have been Nurse Kramer's. Only the Texan communicates with the soldier, if only to comfort himself and perhaps the others in the hospital who find it hard to acknowledge the soldier's presence. "He's all right, I tell you," the Texan would report back to them encouragingly after each of his social visits. "Deep down inside, he's really a regular guy. He's feeling a little shy and insecure now because he doesn't know anybody here and can't talk. Why don't you all just step right up to him and introduce yourselves? He won't hurt you." But nobody believes the Texan, or that the soldier in white can even hear him. They just think the Texan is an annoying fool, and the soldier in white a grim reminder of what can happen in war, the end result being a life not much worth living. The character Nately encounters the old man in a brothel who acts as a prophet, predicting that America will one day fall just like Rome. Quote, his goading remained gentle. Rome was destroyed, Greece was destroyed, Persia was destroyed, Spain was destroyed. All great countries are destroyed. Why not yours? How much longer do you really think your own country will last? Innately is uncomfortable and irritated by the old man. He wants to smash the man's face in for the way he talks. In his mind, he compares the old man to his father, who, quote, believed in honor and knew the answer to everything. This old man believed in nothing and had only questions. The old man keeps asking Nately how long America is going to last. He says, quote, you put so much stock in winning wars. The grubby, iniquitous old man scoffed. The real trick lies in losing wars and knowing which wars can be lost. Italy has been losing wars for centuries, and just see how splendidly we've done nonetheless. France wins wars and is in a continual state of crisis. Germany loses and prospers. Nately considers him a madman, not understanding how he sees everything in completely the opposite way that Nately does. But the man explains to him how he had been the most fanatically pro-American in one instance while waving a Nazi flag for the Germans when they marched into the city, but he sees through hollow patriotism in a way that Nately is not able to. And when the Germans leave the city, he explains he welcomes the Americans, their liberators, with brandy and flowers. But he shoots a red rose into the eye of the major as he rides by. Nately is outraged by the story when he realizes that the old man is talking about Major de Coverley, and Nately asks, how could he do such a thing? To which the old man responds, quote, how could I resist, you mean? You should have seen the arrogant old bore sitting there so sternly in that car like the Almighty himself with his big rigid head and his foolish solemn face. What a tempting target he made. I got him in the eye with an American Beauty rose. Nately can't explain the disappearance of Major de Coverley, and the old man says, quote, you see, imagine a man his age risking what little life he has left for something so absurd as a country. The old man sees beyond patriotism, seeing how the military of every country sends its men to die in wars for the supposed good of that country. Quote, surely so many countries can't all be worth dying for. And while the cynical old man is described as sacrilegious and ugly, Heller uses him as a sharp counterpoint to Nately's idealistic attitude, his belief in the war and that it's worth risking one's life for one's country. I don't think the old man is necessarily someone to like, but a character Heller uses as a rude awakening for Nately's naivete, a warning that he could also die if he's not careful, not living as long as the old man who claims to be 107 years old. I found the chaplain to be one of the more interesting characters in the book. He feels like a stranger in the army, even somewhat like an outcast, since he is not treated with the same friendliness the other enlisted men and officers show one another, and he feels like a failure, quote, in a world in which success was the only virtue. Feeling like an alien around the officers, they smile at him while they wait for him to leave since he makes them uneasy. Quote, why couldn't anybody understand that he was not really a freak, but a normal, lonely adult trying to lead a normal, lonely adult life? If they pricked him, didn't he bleed? He just wants to be home with his wife and children, and he's tormented by morbid fantasies about them, seeing them die in grisly manners, such as burning to death, quote, when the water heater exploded and set the 2-story wooden house afire. He wants to write urgent love letters to his wife in which he would, quote, pour out to her in torrents of self-pity all his unbearable loneliness and despair, and want her never to leave the boric acid or the aspirin in reach of the children, or to cross the street against the traffic light. The laughter there indicates that he's too far into the depths of despair, worrying about his family for it to be mentally healthy. The war does have its effect on the chaplain, whose view of sin is transformed. What was previously sinful was no longer sinful to him. He lies to the doctors by claiming to suffer from a made-up condition known as Wisconsin shingles. As he explains to Yossarian, quote, "There's no such thing as Wisconsin shingles. Don't you understand? I lied. I made a deal with the doctors. I promised that I would let them know when my Wisconsin shingles went away if they would promise not to do anything to cure them. I never told a lie before. Isn't that wonderful?" The chaplain had sinned, and it was good. Common sense told him that telling lies and defecting from duty were sins. On the other hand, everyone knew that sin was evil, and that no good would come from evil. But he did feel good. He felt positively marvelous. Consequently, it followed logically that telling lies and defecting from duty could not be sins. He learns based on feeling what is actually sinful and how everything he thought previously was sinful could be turned into its opposite. Quote, "It was almost no trick at all, he saw, to turn vice into virtue and slander into truth, impotence into abstinence, arrogance into humility, plunder into philanthropy, thievery into honor, blasphemy into wisdom, brutality into patriotism, and sadism into justice. Anybody could do it. It required no brains at all. It merely required no character." The war gives the chaplain a new understanding of morality and how it can be adapted to a different standard when one's survival depends on it. He doesn't get along with Corporal Whitcomb, who has a tent near him in the woods. Corporal Whitcomb is often disrespectful to the chaplain, resting his mud-caked shoes on the chaplain's blanket, eating candy bars while sneering as he reads through one of the chaplain's Bibles. He constantly criticizes the chaplain for not taking him into his confidence. He opens the letter from Major Major and throws it in the trash before the chaplain can even look at it, leaving him with a pear-shaped plum tomato given to him by Colonel Cathcart that will later get him into trouble for even having it. In a conversation with Colonel Cathcart, who has to pull rank with the chaplain, the story of the plum tomato gets revised over and over until later it is turned into a treacherous lie. Quote, "You're only a captain, you know," Colonel Cathcart continued, paying no attention to the chaplain's remark. "You may be a professional man, but you're still only a captain." "Yes, sir, I know." "That's fine, then. It's just as well you didn't laugh before. I wouldn't have given you the plum tomatoes anyway. Corporal Whitcomb tells me you took a plum tomato when you were in here this morning." "This morning? But, sir, you gave it to me." Colonel Cathcart cocked his head with suspicion. "I didn't say I didn't give it to you, did I?" Notice how defensive Colonel Cathcart is all of a sudden over a plum tomato. The plum tomato story just exhibits the absurdity of how things operate within the rank and files of the military. As long as they can pull rank on the chaplain, the plum tomato can be used for just about anything they want to accomplish simply by giving him one. It's almost as if Colonel Cathcart is testing out a made-up lie to see if it will fly in real time before they turn it into something incriminating against the chaplain. Later, we see the chaplain captured and taken away in the rear of a staff car where he is taken to group headquarters to be interrogated about the plum tomato. Quote, "Now I'm beginning to understand. I didn't steal that plum tomato, sir. Colonel Cathcart gave it to me. You can even ask him if you don't believe me." A door opened at the other end of the room, and Colonel Cathcart stepped into the basement as though from a closet. "Hello, Colonel. Colonel, he claims you gave him that plum tomato, did you?" "Why should I give him a plum tomato?" answered Colonel Cathcart. "Thank you, Colonel. That will be all." "It's a pleasure, Colonel," Colonel Cathcart replied, and he stepped back out of the basement, closing the door after him. "Well, Chaplain, what have you got to say now?" It's also completely absurd that the military bureaucracy becomes a mockery of itself. The truth doesn't matter. When a person in position of higher authority speaks, their word is automatically taken to be the truth over anyone in a lower position, such as the chaplain. Even though they let the chaplain go, he is filled with outrage, but it's an ineffectual outrage, as when he tells Colonel Corn he's not going to stand for it anymore and how terrible the plane crash where men who had already served their missions died. The colonel regards him with, quote, cynical amusement and is only concerned with how they are going to make themselves look good in the write-up. Although the novel doesn't specify, it's likely that this is the same crash that Nately dies in, where two B-25 bombers have a mid-air collision, resulting in roughly 10 to 12 deaths. The woman described as Nately's whore spends the rest of the novel trying to kill Yossarian when he informs her of Nately's death. It's as if Yossarian killed Nately himself, and someone has to be punished, as Yossarian rationalizes to himself, quote, "It was a man's world, and she and everyone younger had every right to blame him, and everyone older for every unnatural tragedy that befell them." The blatant disrespect shown in the medical tent when the chaplain tries to advocate for helping Yossarian is illustrated in them painting his gums and toenails purple with a laxative to boot. He begins to doubt the immorality of being unhappy as he tells Yossarian, quote, "I'd like to make the subject of immorality the basis of my sermon this Sunday, but I'm not sure I ought to give any sermon at all with these purple gums." Colonel Corn was very displeased with them. The chaplain experiences the deterioration of faith in both God and religion during wartime simply because spiritual convictions and beliefs are out of place and rendered irrelevant when men's lives are expendable to be sacrificed for the good of one's country. Yossarian constantly has to argue his case with everyone around him that he is an actual human being with a life, not just a disposable soldier. He argues with Nurse Kramer, quote, "Are you crazy?" she scolded virtuously, shaking an indignant finger in front of his eyes. "I suppose you just don't care if you kill yourself, do you?" "It's myself," he reminded her. "I suppose you just don't care if you lose your leg, do you?" "It's my leg." "It certainly is not your leg," Nurse Kramer retorted. "That leg belongs to the U.S. government. It's no different than a gear or a bedpan. The Army has invested a lot of money to make you an airline pilot, and you've no right to disobey the doctor's orders." Yossarian was not sure he liked being invested in. Even Nurse Kramer, who is supposed to be helping human beings, sees Yossarian as no more human than a gear or bedpan, a vessel owned by the government to be used in any way it wants to. And this kind of delusion is what fuels the kinds of people Yossarian is constantly surrounded by. They buy into the delusion while Yossarian sees through it, making him an antagonistic character, as confirmed by Major Sanderson, who lectures Yossarian for not adapting his attitude to the war the same way everyone else seems to. Quote, "You're antagonistic to the idea of being robbed, exploited, degraded, humiliated, or deceived. Misery depresses you. Ignorance depresses you. Persecution depresses you. Violence depresses you. Slums depress you. Greed depresses you. Crime depresses you. Corruption depresses you. You know, it wouldn't surprise me if you're a manic depressive." "Yes, sir. Perhaps I am. Don't try to deny it." While a manic depressive is usually someone considered mentally ill, it's clear that all of the things Yossarian is depressed about only prove his sanity. It's everyone else around him that's insane. But in wartime, sanity itself is treated like a mental disorder, which is Yossarian's dilemma. When Yossarian calls out Major Sanderson for being crazy, he turns red with indignation, acting the way all of the majors, colonels, and men in higher authority act, with blind defensiveness based on rank rather than logic. Like a child, he simply retorts that Yossarian is crazy as a counter-argument, one with no proof or reason behind it other than his word being the authority based on rank. And as a side note, if you worked in the corporate world, you've probably experienced something similar to this. People in higher positions of authority that you know are not as smart as you and who make dumb decisions that everyone has to suffer for simply because they are in a superior position of power. These are the same types of people who speak to people in lesser positions of power with a condescending attitude. But what's behind that attitude is a deep insecurity with themselves. And maybe that's what I can also say about all the majors and colonels Pulling rank is their way of coping with war, a chaotic and stressful situation that tests all of their insecurities about being human. But of course, Major Sanderson doesn't even acknowledge what he has said about Yossarian being crazy. It's as if he never even spoke the words, sending both Yossarian and Dunbar back into combat. Funny how people in authority tend not to remember their own words and will even dismiss them when they are asked to be held accountable for them. Instead, those in authority are more concerned about keeping up appearances with impressive parades and aesthetic bomb patterns. As General Peckham explains, quote, "A bomb pattern is a term I dreamed up just several weeks ago. It means nothing, but you'd be surprised at how rapidly it's caught on. Why, I've got all sorts of people convinced I think it's important for the bombs to explode close together and make a neat aerial photograph." Even General Peckham acknowledges how misplaced people are in the military when he explains how they'll be, quote, "bombing a tiny undefended village in Italy in an entirely unnecessary mission. Quote, its only purpose is to delay German reinforcements at a time when we aren't even planning an offensive. But that's the way things go when you elevate mediocre people to positions of authority." The absurdity of this mission is emphasized when Colonel Korn explains that the intention of creating a roadblock to make it more difficult for the Germans isn't really the point. Quote, "We don't care about the roadblock," he says. "Colonel Cathcart wants to come out of this mission with a good, clean aerial photograph he won't be ashamed to send through channels." Again, it's all about keeping up appearances while discarding humanity in the process, since they also have no plans to warn the people in the village before dropping these bombs. Misplaced priorities lead to misplaced humanity in war, such as when the deaths of men are exploited as an opportunity to be published in a magazine. Quote, 12 men killed meant 12 more form letters of condolence that could be mailed in one bunch to the next of kin over Colonel Cathcart's signature, giving Sergeant Whitcomb hope of getting an article on Colonel Cathcart into the Saturday Evening Post in time for Easter. Dunbar eventually joins Yossarian in rebellion since he disagrees with the mission and intentionally misses the village. Quote, Yossarian no longer gave a damn where his bombs fell, although he did not go as far as Dunbar, who dropped his bombs hundreds of yards past the village and would face a court-martial if it could ever be shown he had done it deliberately. Without a word even to Yossarian, Dunbar had washed his hands of the mission. Basically, the war is an absurd universe where human lives no longer matter, as, quote, Colonel Cathcart was so upset by the deaths of Kid Sampson and McWatt that he raised the missions to 65, underlining how little he could care about the deaths of these men. All that matters is that the war keeps going. Quote, when Colonel Cathcart learned that Doc Danica too had been killed in McWatt's plane, he increased the number of missions to 70. And this is when you almost expect the colonel from Monty Python to step in and say, "Stop that! This is just silly!" Colonel Cathcart is arguably the most unfeeling, unaware character in the novel. He does not care at all about any of the enlisted men under his command. Heller masterfully illustrates how absurdly insensitive he is when he sends letters to the families of men who have died in combat, as in the case of Doc Danica's case, even though he isn't really dead. Quote, Dear Mrs., Mr., Miss, or Mr. and Mrs. Danica. Words cannot express the deep personal grief I experienced when your husband, son, father, or brother was killed, wounded, or reported missing in action. When Yossarian questions Doc Danica, asking how they can send a crazy man out to be killed, Doc Danica simply asks, who else will go? It's clear from this question that the logic of Catch-22 itself doesn't hold water when put to the test. Whether he's crazy or not, Yossarian is required to obey orders regardless. This definition of Catch-22 is confirmed when Yossarian goes back into the shambles of Rome after it's having been bombed, where he finds an old woman who knows the reason everyone has been chased out of the city. Quote, Catch-22, the old woman repeated, rocking her head up and down. Catch-22. Catch-22 says they have a right to do anything we can't stop them from doing. And that's about what it boils down to in the end. A hierarchical power structure that makes no sense, where the people at the top are not only incompetent, but also have no conscience, making decisions that cannot be questioned, no matter how irrational or inhumane they are. In conclusion, Catch-22 is simply an excuse that follows circular logic, leading nowhere but back to itself, proving nothing, as Yossarian realizes. Quote, Catch-22 did not exist. He was positive of that, but it made no difference. What did matter was that everyone thought it existed, and that was much worse, for there was no object or text to ridicule or refute, to accuse, criticize, attack, amend, hate, revile, spit at, rip to shreds, trample upon, or burn up. Yossarian's mindset expands beyond the war. In the end, it's a, quote, lousy earth. He wondered how many people were destitute that same night, even in his own prosperous country. How many homes were shanties? How many husbands were drunk and wives socked? And how many children were bullied, abused, or abandoned? How many families hungered for food they could not afford to buy? How many hearts were broken? How many suicides would take place that same night? How many people would go insane? How many cockroaches and landlords would triumph? It's not just the war that makes it a lousy earth, but the injustices of life, the unnecessary sufferings and despair, and the unfairness of evil triumphing over good. And when all of that is brought into question, one can only wonder if it's worth fighting for. Yossarian realizes he is simply expendable, fighting for people who couldn't care less if he died, and for him it's not worth it in a crooked world where the good people are actually bad. As he explains to Major Danby, quote, the Germans will be beaten in a few months, and Japan will be beaten a few months after that. If I were to give up my life now, it wouldn't be for my country. It would be for Cathcart and corn. Yossarian, after hearing of Orr's miraculous success in escaping to Sweden by boat, plans to desert the military altogether and make a run for Sweden himself. Quote, let the bastards thrive for all I care, since I can't do a thing to stop them but embarrass them by running away. I've got responsibilities of my own now, Danby. I've got to get to Sweden. The chaplain, inspired by Yossarian and Orr, plans to punch Captain Black in the nose with, quote, lots of people around. He explains to Yossarian and Major Danby, quote, if Orr could row to Sweden, then I can triumph over Colonel Cathcart and Colonel Corn, if only I persevere. Yossarian doesn't see running away as cowardly or escaping, because living in danger of betrayal is how he already lives, as he just escapes another murder attempt by Nately's whore before taking off. No one is ever on his side in the war, and so it doesn't matter that he's deserting the war effort. Quote, don't talk to me about fighting to save my country. I've been fighting all along to save my country. Now I'm going to fight a little to save myself. And that's what it all amounts to in the end for Yossarian. Self-preservation over an unnecessary and pointless sacrifice for colonels who care more about being liked than the lives of the men they command. Underneath all the rhetoric and high ideals about serving one's country is the basic need to gratify sensual pleasures, as noted in the opening quote to this video. Materialistic pleasures and other things like pride, greed for power, and keeping up delusions are the real drivers behind war that keep them going on even when there is no real reason left to be fighting them. As someone who never served in the military myself simply because I didn't have to and never received any real encouragement to do so, I relate to this story mostly through its satire of bureaucratic corporate structures. Pulling rank can happen in all kinds of different settings wherever a hierarchical organization is present. For example, even in monasteries, senior monks have been known to pull rank on junior monks. Heller's writing about the war does not originate out of a lack of patriotism, but out of a need to use satire to shine a light on the fog of war. If we no longer recognize satire, it's because we have become a satire of ourselves. Being run by a totalitarian system where we're all a bunch of automatons becomes the new normal. Being reduced to our monetary value becomes the new normal. So even though it's harder these days to find an appreciation for satire, I do believe it is still needed as a way of exposing the truth in a society that is growing more and more confused about what is true anymore. And so I'll just throw it back to you. Have you read Catch-22, and were you able to connect with the humor in it? If you have any other thoughts or insights, leave a comment below. Thanks, and I'll talk to you next time.